Hi everyone, today I'm making a pair of pajama bottoms for my husband and I'm using a pattern I've had for a while now. It's Simplicity 4429. Taking a look at the back of the pattern package, it will show you how to measure for what size pant you'll need, and it also shows how to tell how many yards of fabric that you'll need. So for example, if you were going to make a size large pant and the fabric that you purchase is 45 inches in width, you would see that you need 2 3/4 of a yard of fabric, and if it's 60 inches in width, it comes to 2 3/8 yard of a fabric. This is how I'm going to lay out the pattern pieces. At the top will be the selvages. Here's the fold line. Number 1 is the pants front, and when you cut that you get 2 pieces. Number 2 is the pants back, and you get 2 of those. Number 4 is the drawstring tie, and number 3 is a pocket. I'm going to leave out the pocket, but if you want one, it would be there. And the only thing I do different is I'm just going to leave a little bit more room in between the pieces so that I can separate them more easily. Here you can see I have my fabric laid out on the floor. It's folded in half and it's quite long. I have the selvages meeting at the top here, and I've just lined them up as closely as possible. I smoothed out any ripples or waves in the fabric. And you can see there's a little bit of waste that goes on at the ends. This is where they cut the fabric for you in the store. I've already pinned the pattern to the fabric, and I gave the tissue paper a quick iron because when it comes out of the package it's all folded up and wrinkled. And I've cut along the L line already. I have already used this pattern in the past and I'm making a size large. Here you'll notice I have a green strip of paper on my pattern, and this is because the pattern gives you a choice of either lengthening it or shortening it, only if you determine that you need to do so. Otherwise, you don't even need to bother with this. But what I did was I cut across the line that was given, and I just inserted a couple of inches of this green paper to make the pant leg a little longer. So I did that on both legs. If you wanted to shorten it, all you would do is fold a pleat up on that line to make the pant leg a little shorter. There's the front drawstring, which 2 pieces get cut out of that, and the back elastic guide. Before I pinned my pieces down, I also made sure that this grain line arrow was parallel to the selvage. As you can see over here where there's a little triangle, I left a little notch. That is where I'll be matching up pieces later on. Before I take the tissue paper off, I'm just going to mark a couple of things. Here is the waistline, and it matches up with this white line right there. Here is the line where the buttonhole is going to be, and that's where the elastic drawstring is going to come through. So I just stuck a pin on each end of it just to let me know where to mark. And my fabric is right sides facing together, so I'm just going to mark between these 2 pins, and this marking will go on the wrong side of the fabric. And then I'll just do the opposite side. I've removed the tissue paper, and now I'm going to apply fusible interfacing to the buttonhole, and that'll just reinforce it. The shiny side is the side that you want to put face down, and this is the wrong side of the fabric that we marked earlier. Then put a damp press cloth over it, set your iron to medium steam, and to fuse it, hold the iron down firmly for 10 to 15 seconds. And it's fused on there. And I'm just doing the same exact thing for the other buttonhole mark, and this is shiny side down over our mark on the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, so now we want to stitch the front to the back at the side seams. So I have here one front piece, and you can see the fusible fabric is on the back of it, and I have one back piece over here next to it. So I'm going to just put my back piece on top of the front piece. So I'm just lining it up at the top, and I'm starting to pin it, and here I have the 2 notches that I've just lined up. And I'll just pin this all the way down the fabric. Now I'm doing the exact same thing on the opposite side, just pinning the front to the back at the side seams to get ready to stitch them. And this is just a little tip that I found helpful. I have slipped onto the arm of my machine a piece of elastic, just like the one we're going to be using for the drawstring, and I just sewed it into a loop, and it keeps things lined up as you sew. So this calls for 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. This buttonhole foot, which came with my sewing machine. I have a Singer Curvy. Even though we're not going to be using a button, we just want something that's about the size of the hole that we'll need. So that looks about right. And that goes in this portion of the buttonhole foot. So I'm going to stick that in there, and it's loose until you tighten it up by pushing this part in. So that just molds itself to the size of the button that you would put in there. And I have a presser foot on my machine, so I'm just going to lift that up and press the back, and that falls right off. And put my buttonhole foot on here, which I'll just line it up with the little silver bar. And when it clicks into place, I'll know that it's caught on there. And there we go. Now that I have the buttonhole foot on, I just need to change my selection here. So I'm going to select this, which is the utility stitch, and then at that point I'll get a bunch of different choices, and I just scroll down through these different stitch patterns, and it should be coming up. There we go. And these are the choices for buttonholes, and I'm going to pick number 1. It's a good idea to practice the buttonhole on a piece of scrap fabric before you do it on the actual pants. So here I've drawn an upside down T, and I'm going to put it underneath my presser foot, and I'm going to have the needle just hit it at the intersection of the two lines. Next, I just have to pull down this little lever on the side of my machine, and this just knocks between this white bumper and the silver one, and that always has to be in between those two. Okay, now I'll hit the foot pedal and it'll do the work for me. Okay, and there it is. This one came out just a touch too high, but it gives me a good idea of how to reposition it. Here I'm using a seam ripper to open up the buttonhole, and I have a couple of pins in there to keep me from cutting too far. And next I will do the buttonholes on the real pants, and I'll be back. Just wanted to give you a shot of what the pant leg looks like at this point. So here we have one side, it's a front attached to a back. We sewed the side seam. Now I don't have a serger to finish the seam that was just sewn, but I'm going to use a small zigzag stitch, stitching very close to that sew line, and then I'll just trim off the excess fabric. This way the pant will look a little neater on the inside and it won't look so unfinished. I have my machine set up to do a zigzag stitch to finish the seam, so I press this button here, that's the zigzag on my machine, and I have a width of 2.5 and a length of 2.0. And as I sew, I'll make sure that the zigzag stays within the seam allowance and doesn't cross over my sewing line into my pant. Here's the zigzag stitch that I did next to my original sew line. The sew line is about over here somewhere, and here's the zigzag. And right now I'm just cutting off this excess material. Here's one pant leg, and now I'm getting ready to sew the inner seam. So what I'll do is, this is the right side facing up. I'm just going to fold one side over, and there was a notch from earlier over here and a notch on the opposite side. So I'll just match those up, and then I'll just pin this fabric all the way down the inner seam, and then it'll be ready to sew. I have the inner pant seam pinned, and it's ready to be sewn, and at this point I don't have to worry about this rounded part just yet. So we're just focusing on sewing down the leg. It's going to be 5/8 of an inch again. Okay, now I'll go ahead and sew the other pant leg's inner leg seam, and finish the seam off with a zigzag stitch like on the other side, and then I'll be back for the next step. Okay, here I have the two pant legs, and one pant leg has to go inside the other pant leg, and that way we'll be able to sew this curved part. So right now the wrong side is facing out, so I'm going to take one of the pant legs and turn it inside out. So this way on this one we have the right side on the outside, and I'm just going to stick it into the other pant leg. When the one pant leg is inside the other pant leg, it'll look like this. You'll have the outside buttonhole facing you, and the right sides will be touching each other. So you'll have these two finished buttonholes facing each other like that. And then this curved part will get stitched next. I'm pinning the area, and there's a notch here and a notch here that I'm matching up. The seam allowance for this is going to be 5/8 of an inch also. I'm going over the same area that was just stitched a second time to reinforce it. When I get to the curved area, I just lifted up this presser foot with my needle in just to hold it in place so that I can turn the fabric to get around the curve. Now that this is stitched together twice, the seam allowance needs to be cut down to 1/4 of an inch. And once the seam allowance is trimmed, you can just use the iron to press them open. Now you can stick your hand inside and pull the legs through. And it is starting to look like a real pair of pajama pants. The next step is to create a casing to hold the elastic waistband. So the top of the pant will be folded down like this, and then the elastic will get inserted in here. But before I do that, I'm going to just sew down the seam allowance at the top, because if I don't, this could get in the way when we're pushing the elastic through. It could block it. This particular pattern calls for the top edge to be folded over 1 1/8 inches. So it depends on what pattern you're using. But for this one, I've already pinned 1 1/8 inches down just to make it easier to then iron it. The next step now is to take the raw edge of the casing and just tuck it under 1/4 of an inch and then press it down. I've already pinned down the casing that was just ironed, and now it's ready to take to the machine and sew in place. I'm going to try to sew as close to this edge as possible because I want to leave as much room as I can for the elastic that's going to slip through. This is the elastic, and so it has to fit in that space. So I have this edge lined up with my presser foot at the very end, and I actually move my needle over farther to the left to get just close to the edge here. Here are the two pieces that were cut out for the drawstring, and the instructions are to fold over one end on each piece by 1/2 inch. So over here I just used my pink chalk to mark off 1/2 inch, and I'll just press that down, and I'll just fold the other one down and iron that. Next we want to fold these strips in half lengthwise with the wrong sides together. And press that down. And I'll do the same for the other one. The next step is to unfold this lengthwise, and there's a crease in the center now from pressing it. So now we just want to fold the edges into that crease on both sides and keep this part at the end that was turned in originally, turned in. Now I'm going to take it and fold it in half lengthwise again, and it'll hide these raw edges, and we'll have a nice skinny drawstring. And I'll just press it down as I go. Now that I've folded this together, I'm going to take it to the machine, sew it together, and I'll be back for the next step. Now I have the piece of elastic to insert into the casing. So I'm using this back elastic guide that came with the pattern, and I'm just going to cut off up to a size large right there. Now we have to attach the elastic to the raw edges of the drawstring ties. It has to overlap by 5/8 of an inch, so here I am pinning it down, and I'll do the same on the other side. And next I am going to be stitching it down as it shows in this diagram in the shape of a box on each side. Now that I have the drawstring ties sewn onto the elastic, I'm going to fish it through this buttonhole, and I have a safety pin at the end of the tie just to help me guide it through. And I'll try to keep it flat as I go through the waistband. So we'll just get it in through there. And I'm just kind of bunching up the fabric in my fingers just to move it through, and then pulling that with my right hand. I'll come back when I have it all the way through. Now that the drawstring is inserted, just to make sure that the elastic casing stays flat, I'm going to put a couple of stitches at each side seam on the inside. The pant is turned inside out. The raw edge is folded in by 1/4 of an inch. And now you can fold the pant over again by however much you need to hem the pants after having tried them on. So I'm going to fold it down again about 1/2 inch. So there is about 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to start pinning that. I'm going to use a tailor's ham to press the hemline that I just folded. Just going to press it down, and it'll make it all easier to sew once it's been pressed down. So now I'm ready to stitch my hem along the pressed edge. I'm going to do a little back stitch. There's my husband modeling his new pants. He really likes them, and he said they're very comfortable. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Good luck with your own pants if you're making a pair, and thanks so much for watching.